Billionaire turned down. Every woman, until an obese widow asked, "You want a wife?" A billionaire who swore he'd never trust anyone again suddenly finds his quiet life shattered when an overweight widow shows up at his gate and asks him the one question he never expected. At first he thinks it's just a joke, until danger begins closing in on both of them. Strange messages, a break-in with nothing stolen, and a hidden ledger that could destroy everything he's trying to rebuild. As their worlds collide, one thing becomes clear. This widow didn't just come for a thank you. She walked straight into a conspiracy that's been waiting for her. Now, with enemies watching every move and secrets buried deep in her past, one terrifying question remains. Why was she the only woman he couldn't walk away from? And what will it cost them both? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The grey morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jude Camden's study, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. He sat there, as he did every morning, his fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. The steam had stopped rising minutes, or was it hours, ago, but he hadn't noticed. His eyes were fixed on the stack of case files before him, each one a reminder of his fall from grace. The television droned in the background, another news segment about his supposed crimes. Former tech billionaire Jude Camden's victims still seeking justice, the anchor announced with practiced gravity. Jude didn't bother turning it off anymore. The accusations had become white noise, as familiar as the whir of his coffee maker or the beep of his security system. He reached for another file, his movements precise and mechanical. The heavy security gates outside his estate kept the world at bay, just as he preferred it. The manicured lawns and high walls had become both his sanctuary and his prison. His phone buzzed, another message from his legal team about upcoming depositions. He ignored it, instead opening his laptop to check on his private project. The trust fund he'd established for struggling widows was his one connection to the outside world, though none of its beneficiaries knew their mysterious benefactor's identity. It was easier that way. Safer. Across town, in a small apartment that had seen better days, Josephine Clark, Jo to her friends, stared at the pink paper in her trembling hands. The word eviction seemed to pulse in bold letters, making her heart race. She sank onto her worn couch, the springs creaking under her weight. "Not again," she whispered, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. The morning light streaming through her window highlighted the dust in the air and the patches on her furniture. Everything in her apartment spoke of careful mending and making do. Jo glanced at her watch and jumped up. She was going to be late for her shift at the community center. Grabbing her oversized purse and jacket, she rushed out, barely remembering to lock her door. The drive to work was a blur of worry and mental calculations. How could she possibly make ends meet this month? The community center was already bustling when she arrived. Gloria, her closest friend and colleague, took one look at Jo's face and pulled her into the break room. "Spill it, honey," Gloria said, pushing a cup of coffee into Jo's hands. "What's got you looking like someone cancelled Christmas?" Jo pulled the crumpled eviction notice from her purse. "It came this morning. I thought I had more time, but—" Her voice cracked. Gloria's eyes widened as she read the notice. "But what about last month? Didn't you say someone helped you out?" Jo nodded, remembering the mysterious payment that had appeared just in time to save her from homelessness the previous month. "Yes, and I've been trying to figure out who it was. I need to thank them, Gloria. You don't understand. It wasn't just the money. It was hope, right when I needed it most." "Girl, I've never seen you so determined," Gloria said, studying her friend's face. "What have you found out?" Joe pulled out a notebook filled with her neat handwriting. It took some digging, but I traced the payment through 3 different companies. They're all shells, but the last one led to an address. She showed Gloria the paper. It's in Buckhead. Gloria whistled. Fancy neighborhood. You sure about this? I have to know. Joe insisted. I have to thank whoever it was. They didn't just save my home, they saved me. The rest of Joe's shift passed in a blur of activity, helping families fill out assistance forms, organizing the food pantry, and trying not to think about her own precarious situation. By the time she left, dark clouds had gathered overhead. The drive to Buckhead seemed to take forever. Rain began to fall as Joe navigated the expensive neighborhoods, her old car looking more out of place with each turn. When she finally reached the address, she sat in her car for several minutes, staring at the imposing gates. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against her car roof. Through the downpour, she could make out a massive house set back from the road, its windows gleaming like eyes in the gathering dusk. Come on, Joe, she whispered to herself. You've faced worse than this. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her purse and stepped out into the rain. Her shoes squelched in the wet grass as she approached the gate. Her hands were shaking, but not from the cold. This moment felt bigger than herself, like standing on the edge of something life-changing. The security camera above the gate swiveled toward her. Joe gripped her purse tighter, rain running down her face, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was about to meet the person who had given her a second chance, and nothing, not the rain, not her fear, not even her own self-doubt, was going to stop her. Inside the house, Jude Camden's security system alerted him to a visitor at the gate. He frowned at the monitor, not recognizing the plus-size black woman standing in the rain. She looked determined, despite being completely drenched. His finger hovered over the intercom button as he wondered who she was and what she wanted, and why, for the first time in months, he felt an inexplicable urge to find out. The security guard's umbrella barely shielded Joe from the torrential rain as they made their way up the winding path to the main house. Her shoes, already soaked, made squelching sounds against the expensive stone walkway. The guard maintained a professional silence, but Joe could feel his sideways glances, probably wondering what business someone like her had at the Camden estate. Water trickled down the collar of her coat as she tried to maintain her dignity, though she knew she must look like a drowned cat. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing warmly against the stormy twilight. Each step brought her closer to her mysterious benefactor, and her heart thundered louder than the rain. Inside, Jude Camden paced near the foyer, his usual composed demeanor slightly ruffled. He hadn't had an unexpected visitor in years, let alone one who'd managed to trace his carefully hidden charitable activities. The security feed had shown him a woman who looked completely out of place in his manicured world, yet something in her determined stance had compelled him to let her in. The heavy wooden door opened, and there she stood, rain-soaked but somehow radiant with sincerity. Jude found himself frozen, studying her face as she took in the grandeur of his home. Before he could speak, words tumbled from her lips. "Mr. Camden, I had to come thank you personally," Joe burst out, her voice warm and genuine despite her chattering teeth. "What you did for me last month, you have no idea what it meant." Then, perhaps from nerves or the absurdity of standing there dripping on his marble floor, she added with a self-deprecating laugh, "You want a wife?" The moment the words left her mouth, Joe's eyes widened in horror. "Oh Lord, I am so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. Sometimes my mouth runs ahead of my brain and—" She stopped abruptly, noticing that Jude hadn't reacted with offense or amusement. Instead, he was watching her with an intensity that made her face warm despite her wet clothes. His eyes, a striking shade of grey, seemed to be taking in every detail of her presence. Please, he said finally, his voice quieter than she'd expected. Come into the study where it's warmer. He turned to the guard. Thank you, James. That will be all. The study was everything Joe imagined a billionaire's sanctuary would be. Leather-bound books, rich wood paneling, and a fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Jude handed her a thick towel from a nearby cabinet, his movements precise and controlled. How did you find me? He asked, maintaining a careful distance. Joe patted her hair with the towel. I work at the West Side Community Center. We help people in crisis, so I know how to follow paper trails. 3 shell companies, all leading here. She paused, then added softly, I hope I haven't caused trouble by coming. No, Jude replied, and something in his voice made her look up. But I'm curious why you felt it necessary to thank me in person. Because gratitude matters, Joe said simply. Because you saved more than just my home. You saved my dignity. And because... She hesitated, then continued. Because sometimes people need to know they've made a difference. Jude turned toward the fireplace, his shoulders tense. The donation was meant to be anonymous. I know, Joe acknowledged, and I won't tell anyone, but I couldn't let such kindness go unthanked. My mama raised me better than that. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Joe noticed how Jude's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, how his controlled exterior seemed to ripple with something deeper. You're very different, he said finally, still facing the fire. Different from what? From what I've come to expect from people. He turned back to her, his expression guarded but thoughtful. Most want something from me. Joe smiled, and the warmth of it seemed to fill the room. Mr. Camden, I already got what I needed. A roof over my head and hope for tomorrow. That's worth more than money. Their conversation continued, halting and awkward at times, but threaded with an unexpected honesty. Joe spoke of her work at the community center, her voice animated despite her damp clothes. Jude found himself responding to her openness with small revelations of his own, though his words came slowly, as if unused to being spoken. When James returned to escort her out, the rain had softened to a gentle patter. Jude watched from his study window as Joe's old car disappeared down the driveway, her presence leaving an echo in the usually silent house. After a solitary dinner in his massive dining room, Jude retrieved a familiar file from his desk. The papers inside were worn from repeated handling, news clippings about his fall from grace, accusations of ruthless business practices, evidence that had seemed irrefutable at the time. His fingers traced the name of the financier who had orchestrated it all, the man who had turned him into a pariah with fabricated documents and well-placed lies. But tonight, something felt different. Joe's visit had stirred something he'd thought long buried, a sense of possibility, of human connection untainted by ulterior motives. Her genuine gratitude, her unguarded manner, had cracked the protective shell he'd built around himself. The rain continued its gentle symphony against the windows as Jude picked up the visitor log from his security desk. His fingers found her name, Josephine Clark, written in James's precise handwriting. He whispered it softly, tasting the syllables, while the strange new feeling of hope settled around him like a forgotten friend. Sunlight crept through the heavy drapes of Jude Camden's bedroom, but he had been awake for hours. Sleep had eluded him, replaced by persistent thoughts of Josephine Clark's visit. Her genuine smile, her unguarded manner, the way she had filled his austere study with unexpected warmth. These memories kept replaying in his mind like a film he couldn't stop watching. He pushed back the Egyptian cotton sheets and walked to his mahogany desk, where stacks of legal documents awaited his attention. The familiar routine of reviewing his case should have been comforting, but today the words seemed to blur together. His legal team had prepared new strategies for clearing his name, complete with detailed timelines and potential witnesses, but he found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing its meaning. "Focus," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. But instead of concentration, he found himself wondering what Jo might be doing at that moment. Across town, Jo was having her own struggles. The morning sun streaming through her small apartment window couldn't brighten the mood as she stared at the notice her landlord had just shoved under her door. Despite the anonymous donation that had helped with last month's rent, she was behind again. 30 days. She read aloud, her hands trembling slightly. Final notice before eviction proceedings begin. As if the notice wasn't enough, her day at the community center brought more bad news. Her supervisor, Mr. Peterson, called her into his cramped office just before lunch. "I'm sorry, Jo," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Budget cuts. We have to reduce everyone's hours. You'll be down to 20 hours per week starting next Monday." Jo's heart sank, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I understand, Mr. Peterson. Thank you for letting me know." During her lunch break, she found Gloria in the break room, picking at a sandwich. Gloria took one look at Jo's face and pulled out the chair next to her. "Girl, what's wrong? You look like someone cancelled Christmas." Jo sank into the chair, her shoulders slumping. "They're cutting my hours, and my landlord's breathing down my neck about the rent again." She hesitated, then added, "And yesterday I did something kind of crazy." Gloria leaned forward, her eyes sparking with interest. "Spill it." "I tracked down the person who helped me with last month's rent. It was Jude Camden." Gloria's sandwich stopped halfway to her mouth. "Jude Camden, the billionaire recluse, the one they say destroyed all those small businesses?" "That's him. Except..." Jo paused, remembering his guarded expression, the loneliness that seemed to hang around him like a shadow. "He's different from what the papers say. There's something, I don't know, wounded about him." "Honey," Gloria said gently, "don't go falling for some rich man's sad eyes. That path leads nowhere good." Jo laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Trust me, I'm not. I'll probably never see him again anyway." The rest of her day dragged by, each hour bringing fresh worries about bills and rent. By evening, she sat at her small kitchen table, spreading out unpaid bills like a depressing game of solitaire. The numbers refused to add up to anything but disaster. A soft scraping sound at her door made her look up. An envelope had been pushed underneath, plain white and unmarked. Thinking it might be another notice from her landlord, Jo picked it up. Inside was a photograph that made her blood run cold. It showed her own face from 5 years ago, swollen and bruised, taken during her last hospital visit before she'd finally left her abusive ex-husband. Beneath the photo was a typed message. "Stay out of his business." Jo's hand shook so badly she dropped the envelope. The room seemed to spin as memories she'd worked hard to bury came rushing back. The pain, the fear, the feeling of being trapped. She stumbled to her door, checking the lock, then double-checking it. Her breath came in short gasps as she pulled all her curtains closed. Who could have sent this? How did they get that photo? The hospital records were supposed to be private. And what did it have to do with Jude Camden? Miles away, in his mansion, Jude stood on his balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The evening air was cool against his face as he considered what he was about to do. His lawyers would advise against it. His security team would protest. But for the first time in years, he was listening to something other than caution. He was listening to his instincts. He pulled out his phone and called his driver. "James, have the car ready at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning." He paused, then added, "We're going to West Side." The night settled around both of them. Jo in her locked apartment, jumping at every sound, and Jude in his fortress-like estate, preparing to break out of his self-imposed isolation. As the hours ticked by toward morning, neither could have guessed how their paths were about to converge again. When dawn finally broke, Jude was already dressed and waiting in his study. He watched the sun rise over Atlanta's skyline, his decision feeling more right with each passing moment. At precisely 7 o'clock, he walked to his waiting car, his steps purposeful and determined. As James pulled out of the gated driveway, Jude's eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his mind on the woman who had somehow breached the walls he'd built around his heart. The morning traffic moved slowly through the city, but Jude barely noticed the delay. His thoughts were focused on what he would say when he saw her, how he would explain his unexpected appearance in her neighborhood. For the first time in years, he felt something that resembled anticipation, maybe even hope. Jo sat at her desk in the community center, helping Mrs. Rodriguez navigate through a complex benefits form. The elderly woman's arthritis made it difficult for her to write, so Jo carefully filled in each section as they went along. "Now, how long have you lived at your current address?" Jo asked gently. 15 years this October," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, her accent thick but warm. The door to the center opened, letting in a blast of morning air. Jo glanced up automatically, then froze. Jude Camden stood in the doorway, looking decidedly out of place in his expertly tailored suit. His presence drew curious stares from the seniors gathered for their morning activities. "Miss Clark," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Might I have a word?" Jo's heart hammered in her chest. "I'm with a client right now, Mr. Camden. Could you give me just a few minutes?" He nodded stiffly and moved to wait by the door. Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. "Who is that handsome man, Josephine?" "Just someone I met recently," Jo mumbled, trying to focus on the form. Her hands trembled slightly as she finished filling out the last few lines. When she finally walked over to Jude, he gestured towards the door. "Outside, please." The morning air was crisp, and Jo wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. They moved to a quiet spot near the building's corner, away from curious eyes. "I've been thinking about your situation," Jude began without preamble, "and I believe I have a solution that could benefit us both." Jo waited, wondering what could possibly connect their vastly different worlds. "Marry me." The file in Jo's hand slipped, and she barely caught it before it hit the ground. "I'm sorry, what?" "A marriage of convenience." Jude continued, his tone businesslike. "My reputation needs rebuilding. The public sees me as cold, calculating, heartless. But if I were to marry someone genuine, someone whose motives couldn't be questioned..." He looked at her meaningfully. "Someone like me," Jo said slowly, "because nobody would believe someone like me could be after your money? That's not what I meant." Jude ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You're sincere, Jo. Real. The opposite of everything people think I am. Together, we could change that perception." Jo leaned against the wall, feeling lightheaded. "This is crazy. You don't even know me." "I know enough." His eyes softened slightly. "Tell me what's troubling you. Something's wrong, isn't it?" The threatening note flashed through Jo's mind, along with her mounting bills and the constant fear of ending up homeless. I got a note last night, someone threatening me to stay away from you. And I'm about to lose my apartment. My hours here just got cut." She stopped herself from mentioning the photograph, from revealing just how vulnerable she truly was. "Then let me help," Jude said intensely. "This arrangement would solve your financial concerns, and my security team could ensure your safety. We'd both get what we need." "Can we talk about this somewhere private?" Jude led her to his car, parked discreetly around the corner. Inside the quiet interior, they spent hours discussing details: how long the marriage would last, what would be expected of them both, how they would handle the press. "I know this is overwhelming," Jude said finally, checking his watch. "You need to get back to work. Think about it today. I'll return this evening to hear your answer and discuss more specifics." Jo nodded numbly and headed back inside, her mind spinning. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of paperwork and concerned looks from her co-workers. As promised, Jude appeared just as she was leaving. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. They walked toward her apartment in silence for several minutes before Jo spoke. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll do it." Jude stopped walking, studying her face in the gathering dusk. "Are you certain?" "No," Jo admitted with a weak laugh. "But I'm out of options, and you're offering me a lifeline. Just promise me one thing?" "What's that?" "Promise this won't destroy what's left of my life." Something flickered in Jude's eyes. Concern, perhaps, or recognition of the weight of what they were undertaking. As they continued walking, he seemed unusually alert, his eyes scanning the shadows between buildings and parked cars. Jo wondered if he sensed what she did, that somewhere in the darkness someone was watching. At her door, Jude waited until she was safely inside before leaving. Jo changed into her nightgown with trembling hands and crawled into bed, her mind racing. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won out. As she drifted off, one thought circled in her mind. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life, or taken the first step toward salvation? In the darkness outside, a figure moved away from the shadows of a nearby building, pulling out a phone to make a call. The sleek black car pulled up to Jo's curb precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning. She stood on her front step, clutching her purse with both hands, her heart racing as the uniformed driver stepped out to open the door for her. "Good morning, Ms. Clark," he said politely. "Mr. Camden is expecting you." The leather seats were butter soft against her worn jeans, and Jo couldn't help but feel out of place in such luxury. As they drove through Atlanta's morning traffic toward Jude's estate, she watched the city transform from her familiar working-class neighborhood to the manicured lawns and grand houses of the wealthy. The gates opened silently as they approached, and Jo's stomach tightened with nerves. This time, instead of the rain-soaked walk she'd made on her first visit, the car delivered her right to the front door where Jude waited. "You look worried," he said as she approached. "That obvious, huh?" Jo attempted a smile. "I've never signed so. Much as a car loan, now I'm about to sign a marriage contract." Jude's expression softened slightly. "My legal team will explain everything clearly. No surprises, I promise." The study where they met the lawyers was all dark wood and leather, with morning sunlight streaming through tall windows. 3 attorneys sat at a long table, their expressions professional but scrutinizing as Jo took her seat. "Ms. Clark," the lead attorney began, "we'll be reviewing the prenuptial agreement, timeline requirements, and media strategy. Please stop us if you need clarification at any point." For the next 2 hours, they walked through document after document. The prenup was surprisingly generous. Jo would receive a comfortable settlement even if the marriage ended early, along with guaranteed housing and healthcare for life. The timeline called for a small private ceremony within 2 weeks, followed by carefully orchestrated public appearances to shape their narrative. "The media will dig into your background," one lawyer warned. "We need to know everything that might surface. Past relationships, financial troubles, family history." "I understand," Jo said quietly. "I don't have much to hide. Married young, widowed young. 2 jobs, lots of bills, no criminal record." As they worked through Jude's documentation, Jo's attention was caught by a familiar name, in one of the case files spread across the table. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment as she stared at it. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this name. The financier. He employed my late husband." The room went silent. Jude leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Are you certain?" Joe nodded, memories flooding back. "Marcus, my husband, he worked in the mailroom at one of their subsidiary offices. Sometimes he'd bring work home, sorting through papers." Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "There were documents, ledgers, I think, that he was worried about. I didn't understand them then, but he said they didn't add up." "Did you see these documents?" Jude's lawyer asked sharply. "Yes, but I didn't know what I was looking at. Numbers, company names, dates. Marcus was going to report something, but then the accident happened." Joe's hands trembled in her lap. "I never connected it until now." Jude exchanged meaningful looks with his legal team. "Those documents could prove the fraud scheme used to frame me. Joe, this could change everything." They spent another hour going through Joe's memories of the papers, the lawyers taking detailed notes. By the time they finished, the sun was high in the sky, and Joe felt mentally exhausted. The drive home was quiet, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. But when she reached her apartment door, she knew immediately something was wrong. The lock showed tiny scratch marks, and her heart began to pound. Inside, nothing seemed obviously disturbed at first glance, but as she moved through the small space, she noticed the subtle signs: drawers slightly ajar, papers not quite as she'd left them. When she reached her bedroom, she found her old photo albums moved from their usual spot, their pages carelessly turned over as if someone had been searching for specific images. With shaking hands, Joe pulled out her phone and called Jude. "Someone's been in my apartment," she said as soon as he answered. "Nothing stolen, but they went through my photos, my personal papers." "Pack a bag," Jude said immediately, his voice tight with concern. "I'm sending the car back. You'll stay in my guest room until the wedding. It's not safe there anymore." Joe looked around her bedroom, fighting back tears as she pulled out a small suitcase. She tried to focus on just the essentials: clothes, toiletries, important documents. Through her window, she caught a glimpse of movement across the street. A man stood in the shadow of a building, watching. She quickly stepped away from the window, her hands shaking so badly she could barely zip the suitcase. The car arrived in record time, and Joe hurried out with her bag, feeling the weight of unseen eyes on her back. As they pulled away from the curb, she caught one last glimpse of her apartment in the rearview mirror, wondering if she would ever feel safe there again. In the gathering afternoon light, a dark figure remained in the shadows, watching the car disappear around the corner. The man pulled out a phone, dialed a number, and waited. "She's leaving," he said quietly. "And she's taken papers with her." The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Joe arrived at Jude's estate, her small suitcase looking out of place against the mansion's grand facade. Security guards positioned themselves discreetly around the perimeter, while others monitored cameras from inside a control room. Jude met her at the door, his usual stern expression softened by what appeared to be concern. "Welcome," he said, taking her bag despite her protests. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Joe followed him into the foyer, her footsteps echoing against marble floors. Everything seemed larger and more imposing in the daylight. Crystal chandeliers, sweeping staircases, priceless artwork on every wall. The space felt more like a museum than a home. "It's a bit overwhelming at first," Jude admitted, noticing her wide eyes. "Let me show you around." They moved through room after room, each more elaborate than the last. A formal dining room that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a conservatory filled with tropical plants. Joe tried to take it all in, but her mind kept drifting to her tiny apartment with its mismatched furniture and warm colors. "And this will be your room," Jude said, opening a door on the second floor. Jo stepped inside and gasped. The guest suite was bigger than her entire apartment. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking manicured gardens. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with plush chairs occupied another corner. The attached bathroom featured marble countertops and a soaking tub she could actually fit in comfortably. "It's beautiful," she managed to say, "but it's too much." "Nonsense," came a warm voice from the doorway. "It's exactly what you need." A woman in her late 50s stood there, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. "Jo, this is Mrs. Dobson, my housekeeper." Jude introduced them. "She runs everything here." Mrs. Dobson's smile reached her eyes as she crossed the room to take Jo's hands in hers. "Welcome, dear. Don't let all this grandeur intimidate you. A house is just a house, no matter how big or small." Jo felt some of her tension ease. There was something motherly about Mrs. Dobson that made her feel less out of place. "Now then," Mrs. Dobson continued, "let me show you how things work around here. Mr. Camden has his routines, but we'll create some of our own." Over the next hour, Mrs. Dobson walked Jo through the daily rhythms of the household. Breakfast was served at 7:30 sharp in the morning room. Lunch was more flexible. Dinner was at 6:30 in the smaller family dining room, unless there were guests. The security team changed shifts at specific times, and certain areas of the grounds were restricted after dark. "Don't worry about remembering it all at once," Mrs. Dobson assured her. "I'll help you settle in." By evening, Jo had unpacked her few belongings and changed for dinner. The family dining room, while smaller than the formal one, still felt enormous for just 2 people. Jude sat at the head of the table while Jo took a seat to his right. Mrs. Dobson had prepared a simple but elegant meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. The first few minutes passed in awkward silence before Jo decided to break it. "Thank you again for letting me stay here. I know it's not ideal, having a stranger in your space." Jude set down his fork. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore. And after what happened at your apartment?" He paused. "I should be thanking you for agreeing to this arrangement, for possibly holding information that could clear my name." Something in his voice made Jo look up. The carefully maintained facade had slipped, revealing a glimpse of raw pain underneath. "Can I ask?" she said softly. "What really happened? With the accusations?" Jude was quiet for a long moment. "I trusted the wrong people," he finally said. "Built my company from nothing. Thought I knew who my friends were. Then suddenly there were accusations of fraud, of destroying small businesses for profit. Evidence appeared. Fabricated, but convincing. By the time I realized what was happening, my reputation was destroyed. That's why you hide away here. Partly. Also because I'm tired of seeing contempt in people's eyes, of being judged by lies." He met her gaze. "Your turn. You mentioned your marriage was difficult." Jo's hands trembled slightly as she set down her glass. "Marcus, he could be charming when he wanted to be, but he had a temper. At first it was just words, then pushing, then—" She took a deep breath. "The last time I ended up in the hospital, that's when I finally left. And now someone's threatening you with photos from that time," Jude said, his voice hard. "Yes, but I won't let fear control me anymore." They finished dinner in companionable silence, both feeling somehow lighter for having shared their burdens. Later that night, Jo explored her new room more thoroughly. The bed was the softest she'd ever felt, with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A small sitting room adjoined the bedroom, perfect for reading or just thinking. Despite the luxury surrounding her, she found unexpected comfort in the quiet. She walked to the window, looking out at the illuminated gardens below. Security lights cast soft glows along the pathways, and she could see guards making their rounds. She felt safe here, even if everything else about her situation seemed surreal. In his office down the hall, Jude sat at his computer, digging through files about Marcus Clark. What he found troubled him deeply. Marcus had worked in several positions that would have given him access to sensitive documents that could prove the fraud scheme. His death in a car accident had been ruled just that, an accident. But the timing was suspicious. Jude leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was dangerous. If Jo really had seen those documents, if she could remember enough detail to prove the conspiracy. In her room, Jo lay in the enormous bed, staring at the shadowed ceiling. Everything had changed so quickly, her life, her safety, her future. The man down the hall was still largely a mystery to her, yet she felt oddly connected to him. They were both survivors, both trying to reclaim something that had been taken from them. Jude remained at his desk, thoughts turning to the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. Her honesty, her resilience, her warmth. They stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. This arrangement had started as a strategic move, but it was becoming something else, something neither of them had anticipated. Both remained awake long into the night, contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Jo made her way downstairs, following the concerning smell of something burning. She found Jude standing at the stove, a look of intense concentration on his face as he prodded at what might have once been scrambled eggs. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying not to laugh. Jude turned, revealing a light dusting of flour on his expensive sweater. "Mrs. Dobson has Sundays off. I thought I'd make breakfast." He gestured helplessly at the smoking pan. "It's not going well." Jo moved beside him, gently taking the spatula from his hand. "Here, let me help before you burn down your beautiful kitchen." "I can run a billion-dollar company, but apparently scrambled eggs defeat me," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Everyone has to start somewhere." Jo scraped the blackened eggs into the trash and pulled fresh ones from the refrigerator. "Watch and learn." For the next 15 minutes, she showed him the basics: how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, the proper heat setting, when to add seasonings. Jude proved to be an attentive, if somewhat awkward, student. "See? Not so hard," Jo said as they sat down with plates of properly cooked eggs and toast. "Thank you," Jude said quietly. "It's been a long time since anyone's taught me anything." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Jude's PR team, 3 polished professionals who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Jo immediately felt underdressed in her simple blouse and slacks. "Mr. Camden," the lead consultant Sarah said briskly, "we need to prepare for tomorrow's charity gala announcement. It will be your first public appearance as an engaged couple." The next few hours were grueling. They practiced how to walk together, how to answer questions about their relationship, proper posture for photos. Jo felt increasingly self-conscious as Sarah made pointed comments about her posture and gait. "Perhaps we should consider a more slimming wardrobe," Sarah suggested, eyeing Jo's curves with barely concealed disapproval. "No." Jude's voice was firm. "Jo doesn't need to change her appearance. But sir, the media can be cruel." "The media," Jude interrupted, "will see exactly what I want them to see. A genuine, intelligent woman who accepts me for who I am, not what I own. That's our story because it's the truth." Jo blinked back unexpected tears at his defense. After the PR team left, Jude turned to her. I'm sorry about that. They mean well, but they can be intense. It's okay. They're not wrong about my needing proper clothes for events. Then let's fix that. He grabbed his keys. Come on. An hour later, they were at Atlanta's most exclusive boutique. Joe felt out of place among the pristine displays until the owner, an elegant older woman named Marina, took one look at her and said, "Darling, I know exactly what will make you shine." Marina brought out dress after dress, ignoring Joe's requests for basic black in favor of rich jewel tones and dramatic cuts. When Joe hesitated over a deep emerald gown with delicate beading, Jude spoke up. "Try it on," he encouraged. "Stop hiding." In the dressing room, Joe stared at her reflection. The dress hugged her curves without constricting them, making her feel both powerful and beautiful. When she stepped out, Jude's expression made her blush. "That's the one," he said softly. They left with several dresses, suits, and accessories. As they drove home through the city's twinkling evening lights, Joe's phone buzzed. Her hands shook as she read the text. "Remember the night he broke your arm?" "I do. Stay away from Camden or history might repeat itself." "Joe?" Jude noticed her distress immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, it's just... show me," he said gently but firmly. After a moment's hesitation, she handed him the phone. His jaw tightened as he read the message. "Pull over," he instructed his driver, then made several rapid phone calls to his security team. "We're adding more personnel," he told her, "and I want all your devices checked for tracking software." "You don't have to..." "Yes, I do." He took her hand, surprising them both. "You're not alone anymore, Joe. Whoever's threatening you will have to go through me first." Back at the estate, Joe watched from her bedroom window as Jude argued with his head of security on the back terrace. Even from a distance, she could see the intensity in his gestures, the protective anger in his stance. He was taking her safety as seriously as his own. For so long, she'd handled everything alone. The abuse, the escape, rebuilding her life. Now, watching Jude fight for her security with such passion, she felt something shift inside her. This man, who rarely let anyone close, was choosing to stand between her and danger. The night air carried fragments of their conversation. "I don't care what it costs. Full protection detail, background checks on everyone." Joe pressed her hand against the cool window glass, realizing that what had started as an arrangement of convenience had become something else entirely. Jude wasn't just protecting his investment or his reputation anymore. He genuinely cared. The morning sun streamed through the estate's tall windows as Joe adjusted her navy blazer, a recent purchase that fit perfectly, but still felt foreign on her shoulders. Jude appeared in her doorway, already dressed in one of his impeccable suits. "Ready?" he asked softly. Joe nodded, though her stomach was doing flips. "As I'll ever be." The drive to his lawyer's office took 20 minutes, during which Joe watched Atlanta's gleaming skyscrapers grow closer. Jude's legal team occupied the entire 42nd floor of a glass tower downtown. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that probably cost more than Joe's entire apartment building. 5 lawyers waited in the conference room, their expressions ranging from professionally neutral to barely concealed skepticism. Joe recognized some of them from news coverage of Jude's case years ago. "Please sit," said Marcus Wheeler, the head attorney, gesturing to the chairs. His silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority that made Joe want to shrink into herself. "We need to discuss public strategy," a younger lawyer named Thompson began, sliding folders across the polished table. "The press will dig deep into Ms. Clark's background." "Josephine," Marcus interrupted, peering at her over his glasses. Do you fully understand what you're walking into? The media scrutiny will be intense. Every detail of your life will be examined. Joe sat straighter. I understand. Do you? This came from Caroline Peters, a sharp-featured woman at the end of the table. You'll be representing one of Atlanta's most prominent families. Your appearance, your manner of speaking, your... That's enough, Jude cut in, but Caroline continued. Mr. Camden, we must be realistic. The press will have a field day with... She gestured vaguely at Joe. Certain aspects of her presentation. Joe felt her face grow hot as understanding dawned. They thought she was too fat, too unpolished, too black to stand beside Jude Camden. Before anyone could speak, Jude stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Meeting's over. His voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made everyone freeze. Joe, let's go. Mr. Camden. Marcus began, but Jude was already guiding Joe towards the door, his hand protective at her back. They rode the elevator in silence, Joe fighting back tears while Jude fairly vibrated with anger. Instead of returning to the car, he steered them toward a small coffee shop tucked between the towering buildings. I'm so sorry, he said once they were seated in a quiet corner. They had no right. They're not wrong, Joe interrupted, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. I'm not exactly society wife material. Look at me. Jude waited until she met his eyes. You belong exactly where you choose to be. Those lawyers, they're paid to worry about image, but you have something none of them understand, authenticity. That's why I trust you. His words warmed something inside her, and suddenly Joe wanted to trust him too. She took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. About those files you're looking for. Jude leaned forward, all his attention focused on her. My late husband. Before he died, he was acting strange, paranoid. One night I saw him hiding a USB drive in his desk. After everything happened, I found it. There were documents, spreadsheets full of numbers that didn't make sense to me. Investor names, missing money. I didn't understand it then, but now you think it might be connected to my case. Jude finished quietly. Joe nodded. I looked at those files exactly once. The next day the drive was gone. But I remember seeing your financier's name multiple times. Do you think there might be other copies? Backups? Maybe. Joe stirred her coffee thoughtfully. My mother kept boxes of his things after he died. I couldn't deal with them then. They're still in her basement. We should look through them, Jude said. Those files might be the evidence we need. That evening, back at the estate, they sat in the library sharing tea. The day's tensions had faded, replaced by a comfortable quiet. Joe curled up in an oversized armchair while Jude leaned against his desk. Tell me something true, Joe said suddenly. Something nobody else knows. Jude was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I'm lonely here. His voice was barely above a whisper. All this security, all these walls, sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating. Joe's heart ached at the raw honesty in his voice. Come on, she said, standing and holding out her hand. Let's get some air. They stepped out onto the balcony together. The night was warm, sweet with the scent of jasmine from the gardens below. Atlanta's lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars. Your turn, Jude said softly. Tell me something true. Joe leaned against the railing, considering. I'm scared all the time, she admitted. But since coming here, since meeting you, I'm starting to remember what safe feels like. Jude moved closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, both aware of something shifting between them, something warm and unexpected, like the first hint of dawn breaking through darkness. The night air wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, carrying the promise of possibilities neither had dared to imagine before this moment. In the quiet, their carefully constructed arrangement began to feel less like a contract and more like destiny. The days following their balcony conversation flowed with an unexpected ease. Monday morning found Joe and Jude sharing breakfast in the sunny kitchen nook, where Mrs. Dobson had laid out fresh croissants and fruit. "You've got PR training at 10, Jude reminded her, passing the coffee. "Ready to practice your society smile?" Joe made an exaggerated grimace. "How's this?" His laugh echoed through the kitchen, a sound that was becoming wonderfully familiar. Tuesday brought a casual public outing to a local bookstore, carefully orchestrated by the PR team. Joe found herself relaxing as she and Jude browsed the shelves, discussing their favorite novels. When photographers caught them sharing a laugh over a particularly ridiculous romance cover, the resulting photos looked genuinely happy rather than staged. Wednesday and Thursday were filled with interview preparations. Joe struggled with the mock questions until Jude suggested she stop trying to give correct answers and just be herself. Her honest responses about falling in love with his kindness rather than his wealth impressed even the skeptical PR team. By Friday, they had settled into comfortable routines: morning coffee in the garden, work sessions in the library, evening walks through the grounds. Joe discovered Jude had a dry sense of humor that matched her own, while he found himself looking forward to her commentary on everything from politics to reality TV. Saturday dawned bright and clear. Gala day. Joe stood in front of her bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the deep blue gown that hugged her curves perfectly. The stylist had done wonders with her hair, arranging it in elegant coils that framed her face. Still, anxiety fluttered in her stomach. A knock at the door revealed Jude in his tuxedo, looking impossibly handsome. He stopped short when he saw her, eyes widening. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "Breathtaking." Joe smoothed her hands over the silk nervously. "I feel like an imposter." "You're not." He offered his arm. "Ready to show Atlanta what we're made of?" The drive to the venue passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. As they approached the red carpet, Joe's grip on Jude's arm tightened. "I can't do this," she whispered, watching the flash of cameras. Jude leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes, you can. Just hold on to me. We'll do it together." The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions, photographs, and small talk. Joe was surprised to find some genuine warmth among the polite society smiles, especially from older couples who seemed charmed by her obvious nervousness. When it was time for Jude's speech, Joe watched from the side of the stage, heart swelling with pride. He spoke about second chances and the power of compassion, his voice strong and clear. "Sometimes," he said, looking directly at Joe, "it takes someone believing in you to remember who you really are. Tonight isn't just about raising money for those in need. It's about recognizing the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of kindness." The applause was thunderous. As Jude rejoined her, Joe squeezed his hand. Too moved for words. The moment was broken by aggressive questioning from a cluster of reporters who had pushed their way forward. "Mr. Camden, isn't this relationship just a PR stunt to rehabilitate your image?" "Miss Clark, what attracted you to one of Atlanta's most notorious businessmen?" Before Jude could intervene, Joe stepped forward, chin raised. "Notorious? You mean the man who anonymously helps widows keep their homes? The one who spends hours reviewing charity proposals to make sure help gets to those who need it most? I fell in love with Jude Camden because I saw his heart when he thought no one was looking." Her passionate defense, captured on dozens of phones, began trending almost immediately. Later, as the evening wound down, soft music filled the ballroom. Jude held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Joe followed him onto the floor, settling naturally into his arms. They swayed together, the rest of the world fading away. "Thank you," Jude murmured, "for defending me, for believing in me. I meant every word." Their eyes met and held. Jude's hand tightened slightly at her waist as they turned slowly in the dimmed light. The air between them felt charged with possibility. The drive home was quiet, filled with shared glances and unspoken thoughts. When they reached the estate, Jude walked Joe to her door as he did every night. This time, however, he lingered. Joe looked up at him, heart racing. Jude's hand came up to cup her cheek, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. The possibility thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. At the last second, she pulled back, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. "Good night, Jude," she whispered, slipping into her room. She leaned against the closed door, cheeks flushed, remembering the warmth of his arms during their dance, the look in his eyes when he'd seen her in the blue gown. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if this wasn't just an arrangement, if their morning coffees and evening walks could stretch into years, if those almost kisses could become real. In the hallway, Jude stood for a long moment, a soft smile playing at his lips. He thought about Joe's fierce defense of him, her genuine laugh during their dance, the way she made his massive house feel like a home. Perhaps, he realized, they were both ready to stop pretending this was just about clearing his name. That night, in separate rooms, both Jude and Joe lay awake, minds filled with visions of shared futures neither had dared to hope for before tonight. Breakfasts that lasted for hours, holidays spent together, quiet evenings and loving glances, a life built on the foundation of trust and understanding they'd already begun to create. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Joe's phone erupted with notifications. Wrapped in the comfort of her guest room's plush blankets, she groggily reached for her device. The moment she saw the headlines, her blood ran cold. "Widow linked to Camden financial scandal. Evidence shows Josephine Clark's connection to missing millions." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through article after article. Doctored bank statements showed her name on suspicious transactions. Fabricated emails suggested she had helped funnel money through offshore accounts. Someone had woven an intricate web of lies, making her appear complicit in the very scandal that had destroyed Jude's reputation. Before she could process the shock, another wave of news alerts flooded her screen. This time, they targeted Jude. Camden's widow trust exposed, billionaire accused of manipulating vulnerable women. Joe's heart pounded as she rushed down the hallway, her silk robe billowing behind her. She found Jude in his office, already on the phone with his legal team. His face was ashen, jaw clenched tight. "I need answers," he barked into the phone. "How did they get these documents? Who leaked this?" Through the window, Joe spotted the first news van pulling up to the gates. Within minutes, more vehicles arrived, their satellite dishes stretching toward the sky like metal trees. Reporters clustered at the entrance, microphones ready, cameras rolling. Mrs. Dobson hurried in, wringing her hands. "Sir, they're demanding statements. Security says more are coming." Jude ended his call and turned to Joe, his eyes hard with suspicion. "Did you know about any of this? Were you holding something back?" The accusation in his voice cut deep. "How can you think that?" Joe stepped back, hurt flooding her chest. "After everything we've shared? Then explain why your name is all over documents from 5 years ago." His voice rose. "Documents that somehow connect you to the same people who framed me." "I told you everything I knew." Joe's voice cracked. "About the USB drive, about my husband's involvement. I've been honest from the start." "Have you?" Jude ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Because right now, it looks like you've been part of this whole thing from the beginning. Like our entire relationship was orchestrated to trap me." Tears spilled down Joe's cheeks. "I thought you knew me better than that." Their argument was interrupted by Joe's phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. Her hands shook as she opened it. "You should have stayed away. Now everyone knows what you really are. Meet me at midnight, or the next story will be about your husband's real cause of death. You know where." Joe's knees weakened. The threat confirmed her worst fears. Her stalker was working with the financier, using her past to destroy both her and Jude. She looked at Jude, who was staring out the window at the media circus below. The man who had shown her such tenderness now seemed like a stranger, his walls firmly back in place. In that moment, Joe knew what she had to do. Slipping away to her room, she packed quickly, shoving clothes into her old duffel bag. Tears blurred her vision as she folded the beautiful blue gown from the gala, a reminder of what almost was. She left her new clothes, the gifts, anything that tied her to this brief fairy tale. The sun was setting when Joe made her way downstairs, using the service entrance to avoid the chaos at the front of the house. She could hear Jude's voice from his office, still dealing with the crisis. He had tried calling her phone twice, but she had silenced it. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty hallway, her words meant for the man who had given her hope, who had made her feel worthy of love. But she couldn't stay, not when her presence put him at risk. From his balcony, Jude watched Joe's figure move through the growing shadows of evening. Something inside him screamed to stop her, to fight for what they had built. But pride and hurt kept him frozen in place as she disappeared beyond the gates, swallowed by the city's gathering darkness. In a small motel on the outskirts of Atlanta, Joe checked in under the name Sarah Williams. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaner. The bed creaked as she sat down, clutching her phone with its dozen missed calls from Jude. A cockroach scuttled across the worn carpet. Joe pulled her knees to her chest, finally allowing herself to break down. In less than 24 hours, she had lost everything: her reputation, her safety, and worst of all, the trust of the man she had grown to love. Outside her window, neon lights buzzed and flickered, casting sickly shadows on the wall. Cars rushed past on the nearby highway, each sound making her jump. In this dingy room, far from the warmth and security of Jude's estate, reality crashed down hard. She was alone again, facing an enemy who seemed to hold all the cards. The small TV mounted on the wall played muted news coverage of the scandal. Joe watched her own face flash across the screen, photos from the gala where she had been so happy, now used to paint her as a calculating conspirator. She turned it off, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the harsh glow of the motel's exterior lights. The bed's thin mattress offered little comfort as she lay down fully clothed, too afraid to unpack, too exhausted to plan her next move. Her phone had finally fallen silent. Even Jude had stopped calling. The silence felt like abandonment, even though she had chosen this path. Sleep refused to come as memories of the past weeks tormented her. Morning coffees with Jude, walks in the garden, shared laughter over failed cooking attempts. How quickly it had all crumbled, like a sand castle swept away by the tide. The clock on the bedside table blinked 11:45. In 15 minutes, she was supposed to meet her stalker. Instead, she curled tighter into herself, determined to survive this night and face tomorrow's battles when they came. The neon sign outside cast alternating red and blue shadows through the thin curtains, a lonely lighthouse in her sea of despair. In the distance, a siren wailed, its mournful cry echoing Joe's broken heart. Stale crackers crumbled in Joe's trembling hands as she perched on the edge of the motel bed. The vending machine down the hall had eaten half her quarters before finally releasing the small package of saltines, her only dinner for the night. The wrapper crinkled loudly in the empty room as she pulled out another cracker, her tears falling onto the dry surface before she could take a bite. "Lord?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do anymore. Please, please show me the way." Her prayer dissolved into quiet sobs as headlights from passing cars swept across the wall, making the shadows dance. The crackers tasted like cardboard, but she forced herself to eat, knowing she needed to keep her strength up. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, you can't think straight on an empty stomach." The thought of her mother made fresh tears well up. What would she think of this mess Joe had gotten herself into? Across Atlanta, in his sprawling estate, Jude Camden sat in his darkened office. His phone lay face down on the desk, notifications silenced. 3 meetings had been scheduled for today, all cancelled. His secretary's concerned voice had crackled through the intercom twice, but he hadn't responded. The room felt colder without Joe's warmth. He could still smell her vanilla perfume lingering in the air, could still hear the echo of her laughter from just yesterday morning. How quickly everything had fallen apart. The darkness he'd been fighting for so long crept back in, familiar and suffocating. Jude picked up the blue silk scarf Joe had left draped over a chair, running the soft fabric between his fingers. The emptiness in his chest expanded until it threatened to consume him entirely. He had let her walk away. After all their talks about trust and facing things together, he had failed her when it mattered most. Morning came slowly, creeping across the city like molasses. Joe hadn't slept more than an hour or two, but as soon as the sun rose, she knew where she needed to go. Her mother's house stood silent and still in the early morning light, its faded yellow paint peeling around the windows. Joe hadn't been inside for months. The memories were too painful, too raw. Her key stuck in the lock, rusty from disuse. The door groaned as she pushed it open, disturbing dust motes that danced in the thin streams of sunlight. The air inside was stale and heavy with the weight of abandoned things. Joe moved carefully through the house, each step stirring up memories. There was the kitchen where her mother had taught her to make sweet potato pie, the living room where they'd watched old movies together on Sunday afternoons, and upstairs, the room where her mother had spent her final days. Cardboard boxes lined the walls of the spare bedroom, labeled in her mother's neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, photo albums, tax papers. Joe began methodically working through them, sneezing occasionally from the dust. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened each box, remembering how she'd packed them after the funeral, too grief-stricken to properly sort through anything. In the bottom of a box marked miscellaneous, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a manila envelope with her late husband's distinctive scrawl across the front. Her heart stuttered in her chest as she pulled it out. The envelope was thick, sealed with clear tape that had yellowed with age. Joe's hands shook as she carefully opened it. Inside, she found exactly what she hadn't dared hope for, the missing piece of the puzzle. Page after page of ledgers, all annotated in her husband's cramped writing. Names she recognized from the news. Dates that lined up perfectly with Jude's fall from grace. Transaction records that painted a clear picture of the financier's elaborate scheme. "Oh my God!" she breathed, spreading the papers out on the dusty floor. Here was proof that the financier had orchestrated everything, using her husband as an unwitting pawn before discarding him, just as he had done to Jude. The evidence was irrefutable. She was so absorbed in the documents that at first she almost missed it, the soft creak of a floorboard behind her. Joe froze, her breath catching in her throat. That wasn't the normal settling of an old house. Someone else was there with her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she remained perfectly still, listening. Another creak. Closer this time. The papers in her hands suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She wasn't alone in the house anymore, and whoever was there had managed to enter without making a sound. The sound of the floorboard creaking sent ice through Jo's veins. She turned slowly, papers clutched to her chest, and found herself face to face with a nightmare from her past. Marcus Reeves, her late husband's former associate, stood in the doorway. His thin lips curved into a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Josephine," he said softly, taking a step forward. "I've been waiting for the right moment to catch up." Jo's mind raced as she backed away. Marcus had always unnerved her, even when her husband was alive. There was something predatory in the way he moved, like a snake preparing to strike. "Stay back," she warned, her voice shakier than she wanted it to be. The documents felt heavy in her hands, precious evidence that could finally clear Jude's name. Marcus's eyes flicked to the papers. "I see you found David's little insurance policy. He was always too careful for his own good." He took another step forward. "Hand those over, and we can pretend this never happened." Instead of responding, Jo turned and ran. Her feet pounded against the old wooden floors as she bolted for the hallway. Behind her, Marcus cursed and gave chase. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a maze, shadows stretching across her path in the dim morning light. She reached the stairs, but Marcus was faster. His hand caught her arm, yanking her backward with enough force to make her cry out. The papers scattered across the floor as Jo fought to break free, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Let me go!" she shouted, driving her elbow back hard. It connected with his ribs, forcing him to loosen his grip just enough. Jo wrenched away and stumbled down the hallway, ducking into her mother's old bedroom. She slammed the door shut and turned the lock just as Marcus crashed against it. "You can't hide in there forever, Josephine," he called through the wood, his voice eerily calm. "And when I get in, you'll wish you'd been smarter about this." Jo's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. She hit Jude's number, praying he wouldn't ignore her call. The door shuddered as Marcus threw his weight against it again. Jude answered on the second ring. "Jo?" "Jude," she gasped out, her voice breaking. "He's here, at my mother's house. Marcus Reeves. He's trying to get in, and I found the evidence, but I can't." Another crash against the door made her jump. "I'm coming," Jude said immediately, and she could hear him moving, shouting orders to his security team. "Where exactly are you in the house?" "Upstairs bedroom, but I don't know how long the door will hold," she whispered, watching in horror as the wood began to splinter near the hinges. "Jude, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for leaving. Stay on the phone with me," he commanded, his voice tight with worry. "We're getting in the cars now. Just hold on, Jo. Please, hold on." The door cracked ominously. Jo looked frantically around the room, her gaze landing on the window. Below it was a small overhang above the back porch, if she could just reach it. "I have to try for the window," she told Jude, moving quickly. "He's almost through the door." "Be careful," Jude urged. She could hear sirens in the background of his call. "We're 5 minutes out." Jo pushed the window open as the door gave way with a final crash. Without looking back, she climbed out onto the narrow ledge, her heart in her throat. Marcus appeared at the window, rage distorting his features. "Enough games," he snarled, reaching for her. Jo didn't hesitate. She slid down the sloped overhang and dropped to the ground, pain shooting through her ankles at the impact. Ignoring it, she ran for the old garden shed where she'd spent countless hours helping her mother tend to seedlings. The familiar hiding spot called to her like a beacon of safety. She crouched behind the weathered structure, trying to control her breathing as footsteps crunched through the overgrown grass. Marcus's shadow stretched across the ground as he prowled the yard, searching. "Come out, come out," he called in a sing-song voice that made her skin crawl. "You're only making this harder on yourself." The sound of screeching tires cut through the morning air. "Joe!" Jude's voice rang out, deep and desperate. "Joe, where are you?" "Here," she called back, relief flooding through her as black SUVs swarmed the property. Security teams poured out, weapons drawn. Marcus made a break for the scattered papers by the back door, but 2 guards tackled him before he could reach them. He thrashed and fought as they secured his hands behind his back, spitting curses and threats. Then Jude was there, wrapping Joe in his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. She didn't care. She clung to him just as fiercely, her whole body trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. "When you left. I'm sorry," she whispered again, pressing her face into his chest. "I was trying to protect you, but I was wrong. We're stronger together." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The morning air was cold against Joe's skin, but Jude's warmth surrounded her like a shield. She watched as the security team collected every piece of evidence, carefully preserving what she had found, proof that would finally set things right. Marcus glared at them as he was led to a waiting vehicle, but Joe wasn't afraid anymore. She had Jude's arms around her, his heartbeat steady against her cheek, and the truth was finally coming to light. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Atlanta's skyline as Jude's car wound its way back to his estate. Joe sat beside him in the passenger seat, her hands still trembling slightly as she clutched the folder containing the ledgers. Every few minutes, Jude would glance at her, as if reassuring himself she was really there. "I've called everyone in," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The legal team, investigators, they're waiting at the house." Joe nodded, running her fingers along the folder's edge. "I should have looked through Mom's house sooner. All this time, the evidence was just sitting there." "You couldn't have known," Jude replied, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "What matters is that you found it now." They pulled through the estate's gates, and Joe's heart clenched at the sight of the mansion. Just days ago, she'd fled this place, convinced she was protecting Jude by leaving. Now it felt like coming home. The driveway was lined with expensive cars. The legal team had already arrived. Mrs. Dobson waited at the front door, her usually stern face softening with relief when she saw Joe. "Thank heavens you're all right," the housekeeper said, pulling Joe into a tight hug. "The kitchen's stocked with fresh coffee and those pastries you like. You'll need your strength today." Inside, the formal dining room had been transformed into a makeshift war room. Lawyers in crisp suits sat around the long table, laptops open and papers spread everywhere. They looked up as Jude and Joe entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cautious hope. "Show them," Jude said gently, his hand warm against Joe's back. With steady fingers, Joe opened the folder and began laying out the documents. Bank statements, transfer records, private correspondence, and most damning of all, the original ledgers showing how the financier had systematically framed both Jude and her late husband. "This is incredible," one of the senior lawyers breathed, examining a particularly crucial document. "This proves everything. The timing of the transfers, the shell companies, the altered records, it's all here." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Investigators photographed every piece of evidence while the legal team built their case. Joe answered countless questions, drawing on memories she didn't even know she had about conversations overheard and documents glimpsed years ago. Throughout it all, Jude stayed close, his presence anchoring her. When she started to feel overwhelmed, he guided her out to the garden for fresh air. They walked among the rose bushes, their shoulders brushing. "I keep thinking about that first day I showed up at your gate," Joe said, stopping to touch a velvet soft pink petal. I was so nervous, just wanting to thank you for helping me. I never imagined that we'd end up here." Jude finished, his voice gentle. "Neither did I. But I'm grateful for every moment, even the hard ones." Later, they retreated to the kitchen while the legal team prepared for tomorrow's press conference. Joe insisted on cooking, finding comfort in the familiar motions of chopping vegetables and stirring sauce. Jude watched from the counter, passing ingredients when asked and asking questions about her recipe. "My mother taught me this dish," Joe explained, adding herbs to the pot. "She always said good food feeds more than just the body. It feeds the soul too." "She was right," Jude said softly. "Just like she raised a daughter who sees the good in people, even when they don't deserve it." Evening settled over the estate, bringing with it a deep exhaustion. The lawyers finally departed, leaving behind stacks of prepared statements and media strategies for tomorrow. Jo made her way up to her guest room, her body aching from the day's stress. She had just changed into comfortable pajamas when a gentle knock sounded at her door. Jude stood in the hallway, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I need to say something," he began, stepping into the room. "When everything fell apart, I doubted you. Even after all we'd shared, I let old fears cloud my judgment. I'm so sorry, Jo." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as the emotions of the past days caught up with her. "I thought I'd never see you again," she admitted, her voice breaking. "When I left, it felt like my heart was being torn in two, but I was so scared of bringing more trouble to your door." Jude crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "Never again," he promised, his words fierce with conviction. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. You will never have to carry your burdens alone again." Jo's tears soaked into his shirt as she clung to him, letting out all the fear and pain she'd been holding inside. Jude held her through it all, one hand rubbing soothing circles on her back, while the other cradled her head against his chest. When her tears finally subsided, exhaustion washed over her in waves. Jude helped her into bed, tucking the covers around her with tender care. "Sleep," he murmured, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." Jo's eyes grew heavy as she watched him move to the door. Outside her window, the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky. A bird began to sing, its clear notes heralding the new day. As sleep claimed her, Jo felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with Jude by her side. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of truth finally coming to light. Inside Jude's estate, preparations moved at a dizzying pace. Journalists and camera crews gathered on the lawn while security maintained a tight perimeter. Jo stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down her navy dress with trembling hands. The outfit was elegant but understated, chosen to reflect sincerity rather than flash. Mrs. Dobson appeared behind her, adjusting the collar with motherly care. "You look perfect, dear," the housekeeper assured her. "Just be yourself. That's what touched everyone's hearts in the first place." A soft knock preceded Jude's entrance. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, but his usual rigid posture was softened by concern for Jo. "Are you ready?" "As I'll ever be," Jo replied with a shaky smile. "Just don't let me trip on my way to the podium." "I won't let you fall," Jude promised, offering his arm. They descended the grand staircase together, camera flashes already visible through the windows. The legal team waited in the foyer, running through last-minute details. Jo noticed their attitudes had shifted. Gone was the earlier skepticism, replaced by genuine respect. The morning sun warmed the outdoor podium area, where rows of chairs held nearly 100 reporters. Jo's heart hammered as she took her seat beside Jude. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. Jude approached the podium first, his shoulders straight but not stiff. The cameras clicked rapidly as he adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Today I stand before you not just to clear my name, but to acknowledge my own past failings and share a story of redemption made possible by one woman's extraordinary courage." He detailed the conspiracy methodically, presenting evidence of how the financier had orchestrated his downfall. But more compelling was his raw honesty about his own mistakes. "I was not always the man I should have been," Jude admitted. "My pursuit of success often came at the cost of compassion. When I was framed, part of me believed I deserved society's contempt. But someone showed me that past mistakes don't define us. Our choices to grow and change do." His eyes found Joe's as he continued. "Josephine Clark came into my life seeking only to express gratitude. Instead, she brought truth, authenticity, and a reminder of what real strength looks like. Without her bravery in confronting her own painful past, this conspiracy would have remained hidden." When Joe rose to take her turn at the podium, her legs felt like jelly. But Jude's words had given her strength. She looked out at the sea of faces and began speaking from her heart. "I never planned to be standing here," she started softly. "For years, I tried to make myself smaller, not just physically, but in every way. I survived an abusive marriage that left me believing I was worthless. When I finally escaped, I thought hiding was the only way to stay safe." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But sometimes life puts you exactly where you need to be. Meeting Jude Camden showed me that wealth and power don't define a person's character. Their actions do. Working together, we discovered that my late husband had been caught in the same web of deception. The evidence we're sharing today proves not only Jude's innocence, but reveals a pattern of exploitation that has hurt countless others." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but didn't fall as she concluded. "I stand here today for everyone who's ever felt powerless against injustice. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And it's never too late to stand up and be counted." The silence that followed her words lasted only seconds before applause erupted. Reporters rose to their feet, many wiping away tears of their own. Questions poured forth, but they were respectful, focused on the evidence rather than sensation. By early afternoon, breaking news alerts flashed across every screen. "Financier arrested in multi-million-dollar conspiracy." The FBI had moved swiftly once the complete evidence was presented. Hours later came the official statement clearing Jude's name of all wrongdoing. That evening, the estate buzzed with quiet celebration. Staff members who had stood by Jude through the darkest times shared embraces and relieved smiles. Mrs. Dobson outdid herself preparing everyone's favorite comfort foods, insisting they gather in the large kitchen rather than the formal dining room. Joe found herself at the center of it all, accepting hugs and kind words while she prepared tea the way she had that first morning, with care and attention to each person's preferences. She felt Jude's eyes on her as she moved around the kitchen, and when she glanced his way, the tenderness in his expression made her heart skip. As the gathering wound down, Jude drew Joe aside. "Would you join me on the balcony?" The night air was soft and sweet with early summer. City lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars, while actual stars twinkled overhead. Joe leaned against the railing, feeling peace settle over her for the first time in years. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she admitted quietly. "Let alone this." "This?" Jude prompted, moving closer. "Complete," Joe finished. "Like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Jude's hand covered hers on the railing, and when their eyes met, the last walls between them crumbled away. No words were needed. They both knew love had transformed their carefully planned alliance into something far more precious and real. They stayed there together, watching the city lights dance below, their joined hands a bridge between past and future, between hurt and healing, between two hearts that had found their way home. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the estate's manicured lawn as Jude stood at his bedroom window, fingers nervously turning the small velvet box in his pocket. He'd woken before dawn, his heart racing with anticipation. Today would change everything. After breakfast, he found Jo in the kitchen helping Mrs. Dobson with the dishes, her laughter filling the space with warmth. The sight of her, comfortable, natural, belonging, made his chest tight with emotion. "Would you take a walk with me?" he asked, extending his hand. "The azaleas are in full bloom." Jo's eyes brightened. "Let me just dry my hands." Mrs. Dobson shooed them out with a knowing smile, and moments later they were strolling through the gardens. The morning air was crisp and sweet with spring flowers. Jo's hand slipped naturally into Jude's, their fingers intertwining for the first time. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through both of them. They walked unhurried paths between beds of purple and pink azaleas, their petals still holding drops of morning dew. Butterflies danced around the blooms, and birds called from the old oak trees. Everything felt alive with possibility. As they approached the white wooden gazebo, the same one where Jo had once sat alone crying after that terrible press conference, Jude's steps slowed. His heart thundered in his chest. "Jo," he said softly, turning to face her. "This spot holds painful memories for both of us, but it's also where I first realized something important." She tilted her head, questioning. "What was that?" "That I was falling in love with you." His voice was thick with emotion. "When I saw you here that day, hurting because of me, it broke something open inside me. I'd spent so long hiding behind walls, but you, your honesty, your courage, your beautiful heart, you made me want to be better, to be worthy of you." Tears welled in Jo's eyes as Jude slowly dropped to one knee, pulling out the velvet box. "Josephine Clark," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm not asking this time for convenience or reputation. I'm asking because you've shown me what real love looks like. You've taught me that true strength isn't in power or money, but in having the courage to be vulnerable and authentic. You make me want to be the best version of myself." He opened the box, revealing a vintage rose gold ring with a modest but brilliant diamond. "This was my grandmother's ring. She was the kindest, most genuine person I've ever known, until I met you. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? For real this time?" Jo's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded vigorously, dropping to her knees beside him. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, yes, yes." Jude's hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her close as they both laughed and cried. The week that followed passed in a happy blur of preparation. They agreed on a small, intimate ceremony at Jo's church, wanting to celebrate with the people who meant the most to them. The guest list included families from the community center where Jo worked, church members who had supported her through hard times, and several widows who had been helped by Jude's anonymous trust. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The little church glowed with natural light, streaming through its stained glass windows. Simple arrangements of white roses and baby's breath decorated the pews, and soft classical music filled the air. Jo stood in the church office, which had been converted into a bridal room, smoothing her dress, an elegant A-line gown in ivory lace that made her feel beautiful rather than self-conscious. Gloria, her friend from the community center, helped adjust her veil. "You look absolutely radiant," Gloria said, wiping away tears. In the sanctuary, Jude waited at the altar, his heart full as he watched their guests arrive. Mrs. Dobson sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes already. Several rows were filled with women and children from the trust program, their presence a testament to the good that could come from pain transformed into purpose. When the music changed and the doors opened, Jude's breath caught in his throat. Jo walked down the aisle alone, her head held high, her smile luminous. She carried a bouquet of white roses and wore his grandmother's pearls around her neck. But it was the joy radiating from her that made her truly stunning. Their vows were simple but profound, spoken from hearts that had learned to trust again despite past wounds. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was sweet with promise and healing. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, transformed by twinkling lights and more flowers. Instead of a formal seated dinner, they had arranged for various food stations featuring comfort foods from different cultures, honoring the diverse community that had brought them together. During the celebration, Jude pulled Jo aside to share his surprise. "I've set up a foundation in your name," he told her, handing her a folder. "It's fully funded to establish and maintain a women's support center, a place where survivors can find help, hope, and healing." Jo's eyes widened as she looked at the papers. The amount was in the millions. "Jude," she whispered, overwhelmed. "You've shown me what it means to use privilege for purpose," he said softly. "This is just the beginning." 3 days later, Jo stood before the renovated building that would house the new center. Sunshine glinted off the brass nameplate. The Clark Camden Center for Women's Empowerment. Her hands trembled slightly as she fitted the key into the lock. The door swung open smoothly, revealing a warm and welcoming space designed to make visitors feel safe and valued from the moment they entered. Comfortable seating areas, soft lighting, and inspiring artwork created an atmosphere of hope. Private counseling rooms, a children's play area, and a resource library stood ready to serve. Jo's heart swelled as she walked through the rooms, touching the walls, straightening already perfect pillows. This place represented everything she had dreamed of, providing for other women who felt trapped and helpless as she once had. It was a testament to the power of love to heal and transform. The morning light streamed through the windows, making patterns on the freshly painted walls. Jo stood in the center of the main room, breathing in the possibility of new beginnings. She was no longer the scared woman who had arrived at Jude's gate in the rain. She was strong, loved, and ready to help others find their own path to healing. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Atlanta as life settled into a new rhythm for Jo and Jude Camden. Their days had found a comfortable pattern, mornings spent sharing coffee and newspapers, followed by purposeful work that filled them both with satisfaction. The Clark Camden Center for Women's Empowerment had become a beacon of hope in the community. Jo moved through the bright halls, greeting clients by name, her presence bringing immediate comfort to the women who sought refuge there. The center's success stories multiplied weekly, women finding jobs, leaving abusive situations, securing housing, and rebuilding their lives. Jude had returned to business, but with a transformed approach. He focused on ethical investments and community development, turning his financial expertise toward uplifting struggling neighborhoods. His reputation had been fully restored, and he'd earned a new kind of respect, not for his wealth, but for his integrity. On this particular evening, they sat together in their living room for an exclusive interview with Sarah Chen, a respected journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The setting was intimate, with warm lamplight casting a gentle glow across their faces. Jo wore a deep purple dress that complemented her skin tone perfectly, while Jude looked relaxed in a casual blazer. "Mr. Camden," Sarah began, her recorder placed carefully on the coffee table between them. "You were famously reclusive after the scandal. You turned down countless social invitations and, according to several sources, rejected numerous potential relationships. What changed with Joe?" Jude's face softened as he looked at his wife. His hand found hers naturally, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "I turned down every woman," he said, his voice warm with affection, "until the one with the kindest heart walked into my life and simply asked, 'You want a wife?'" He chuckled, squeezing Joe's hand. "That question saved my life." Joe laughed, the sound rich and genuine, as she leaned into his shoulder. Her hand came to rest on his chest, a gesture of intimacy that spoke volumes about their connection. "I still can't believe I actually said that," she admitted, her eyes twinkling. Sarah observed them thoughtfully, noting how they moved in sync, how their bodies naturally oriented toward each other. "And now?" she prompted. "Now," Joe replied, "we're building something beautiful together. Not just the center or Jude's ethical investment initiatives, but a life that matters." As the interview wrapped up, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They bid Sarah farewell at the door, where Mrs. Dobson was arranging fresh flowers in the entryway, one of many touches that had transformed the once austere mansion into a warm home. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with life. Music often played softly in the kitchen where Joe loved to cook. Laughter rang through the halls. Even Jude's office had softened, family photos now sharing space with his business documents. They made their way to the balcony, their special place where so many important moments had unfolded. The city of Atlanta spread before them, a tapestry of twinkling lights coming alive as darkness fell. Their fingers remained intertwined, a simple gesture that spoke of deep connection. Looking out over the city they both loved, they shared a moment of profound gratitude. They had found in each other not just love, but healing, purpose, and the chance to make a real difference in the world. Second chances had given them both new life, transforming past pain into present joy. The lights of Atlanta shimmered below them, each one representing a story, a life, a possibility. And there they stood together, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed to become their best selves. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.